Hi, my name is Christopher Brown from the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures at Harvard University, and we are very happy to be joined by our own Jeffrey Schnapp, professor in RLL, as well as faculty member at the Graduate School of Design and director of MetaLab. We will be discussing his latest publication, The Electric Information Age Book. Professor, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So, Professor, you have worked on a wide array of subjects and time periods in the past, having published books on Dante, on futurism, on fascism, among others. But this project, on the surface, seems to be quite a bit different. This project's actually a collaboration with graphic designer Adam Michaels. Could you explain to us a bit about how this project was born?
Yeah, this book had a peculiar genesis in the sense that it actually came from a prior collaboration with Adam Michaels on an exhibition project where he was involved in designing the signage for the Speed Limits exhibition, which was an exhibition held at the Canadian Centre for Architecture in 2009 to celebrate the centenary of the publication of the founding manifesto of futurism. And in that context, Adam and I started working together. And just by sort of circumstance, about a year and a half later, we discovered that we had this shared passion for a largely sort of unstudied or understudied moment in the history of the sort of media transformations that were taking place in the late 1960s, namely the moment when a number of people within the publishing industry started trying to reimagine the very nature of the language that books, particularly mass market paperback books, should speak in the context of the rise of television, but also of the first wave of cybernetics and the kinds of larger transformations that both of those were bringing about. So the Electric Information Age book was really born out of that discovery of a shared passion. But it does actually connect very closely to my own interests in especially the avant-gardes and the way in which experimental poetics, right from the beginning of the 20th century forward into the interwar period, essentially goes through a series of cycles of attempts to expand the language of typography, to reimagine what a page is as an event, to experiment with more active, even interactive models of reading, to break down the boundary line between forms of semantic based textuality and visual forms of communication, to even flirt with possibilities that books might speak a language that in our terminology today we might call a kind of multimedia language. So even though it's a book that stands a little bit outside of some of my main research interests, in part because it's my debut as an Americanist, it actually does intersect, I think, pretty tightly with some of the long-standing research interests that I've had. Actually, really even going back to my work in the medieval field, where I've always been interested, particularly in the porous boundary between forms of what we think of as two disjunct areas, visual culture and literary culture.
This intersecting of boundaries and this collaborative effort actually speaks to the Electric Information Age book itself. I think the word collaboration is essential when we think about the key works that were forged during this era, such as The Medium is the Massage. Many of these seem to have been brought about through the various participatory efforts of Marshall McLuhan, Jerome Agel, and Quentin Fiore. Could you tell us a little bit about the roles of these three individuals who are actually quite unique in their own right, and just how they created what came to be called the Electric Information Age book?
Collaboration, for me, is more than just an object of research. It's something that's become very integral to my own work in areas of design practice associated with the digital humanities. So I came to this topic with a sort of surcharge of personal interest. And one of the things I wanted to understand on the basis of some of the archival research that I did was really how this collaboration and the other collaborations that were undertaken to produce this sort of 10-year time span of experimental paperbacks, how they actually happened. In the case of the lead book, which is in a sense the centerpiece of my collaboration with Adam, The Medium is the Massage, that was a project where McLuhan really played a very minor role. He was in a sense, the foundation of the project, in as much as his rise to celebrity in the wake of the publication of Understanding Media in the early 60s had gradually skyrocketed him to international fame. He had become even a television personality, first in Canada, then in the United States. His work was beginning to be picked up by the counterculture, by the protest movements, by major arbiters of public opinion, certainly in the circles around writers like Tom Wolfe. Building on that sort of surge in his celebrity, Jerome Agel, who was a public relations guy, a journalist, a sports journalist by training, actually, but somebody who was engaged, actively engaged, starting in the early 60s in trying to reimagine the publishing industry, to shake off the sort of slightly dusty and gentlemanlike atmosphere in the name of some good Madison Ave, razzle-dazzle, trying to change the kind of approach that publishers took to putting projects together, trying to really bring publishing into the television and the multimedia age as it was understood circa 1965. He saw in McLuhan an opportunity to really do something that would take that project several steps beyond where it had been. And Quentin Fiore was his next door neighbor on Madison Ave. It's completely by accident. They just happened to have offices, the Agel Publishing Company and Fiore's design studio. So Agel was one of the first of a generation of figures within the publishing industry who were insurrectionaries and who defined themselves as producers. And by producer, what they meant, and Agel in particular meant, is they played roles that are very analogous to the roles of film producers or theater producers. They did everything on a project. They put the talents together. They oversaw the launch, the media campaigns that would accompany the publication. They got in under the hood and were engaged in cutting, pasting, editing. So they were on the content as well as the packaging side. And so it was Agel who approached McLuhan, made him an offer to essentially remix materials from McLuhan's own recent publications. A lot of the source materials from Museum of the Massage are based on McLuhan, but they have no basis in McLuhan. They're not simply citations from McLuhan's works. They're seriously, substantially reworked from McLuhan's works. And he worked in tandem with Quentin Fiore, his next-door neighbor, who was a distinguished graphic artist with a very deep knowledge of the history of typography and book design, but whose main practice as a designer had been associated with working for Bell Labs, for a number of publication companies, for the Ford Foundation. And they really literally set about inventing a new kind of book, which was they imagined as and indeed this label stuck, the electric information age book. And by that they meant a book that has a much more radical relationship to the present, that is no longer a kind of artifact that comes along many years after the facts that it describes, but rather that, like a page on a newspaper, sort of intersects with, comes right up to the edge of the present, and that speaks that language. And that language, as Agel and Fiore imagined it, and of course McLuhan had theorized, was an age where television had created this sense of live communications modes as being the normative modes of the era.
So this new model and this new language of these books proposes a sort of cognitive retooling, as has been suggested in your book, and requires an active reading and a meaning creation by the reader, not just by the authors. In your book, too, speaks this similar sort of language and perhaps could be called a sort of meta book about the experimental book. Could you speak about what might have been the motivations in your own stylistic choices and maybe some of the challenges in this process?
Yes, I think that one of the features that has attracted me, and it certainly attracted Adam Michaels, and has made, especially for the graphic design community and for the digital design community, these books interesting to go back and look at, is that they are books that engage in constant forms of play with a very active reading. In the process of trying to, in a sense, create a new televisual language for the paperback book, they often are, in a very self-conscious and sometimes outright, playful way, call attention to the way in which one consumes such a book, the way in which your eyes scan the page, the way in which the reader, in a sense, is at the commands of the device itself.
I think we can all take a lesson from this book then in moving forward as scholars. So thank you very much for joining us today, Professor, and thank you for your book.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, Chris.